Games Workshop, Warhammer 40K, and 3D printing. That's the secret sauce. That's the spice that we're going to explore in today's vlog. But first, a little bit of context, a little bit of a lead-in. A number of years ago, I found myself standing online for Games Day. We would always run a club table. We'd have events, and that let you get to Games Day early, a day before, to set up. And it was fantastic to meet other clubs, other players, and kind of get an idea of new releases. But you could stand on the Forge World line and waiting on that line ahead of everybody else. I'm up there buying an Eldar Titan. I'm like, I can do this. It was like, I don't know what it was at the time, $300-400, which even in Games Workshop-esque language, that's a lot of coin. That's a lot of money. And I'm sitting there looking at me like, this is a chance to buy the Titan, because otherwise if I ordered it through Forge World, there could be a miscast, it could be missing a piece. This is a chance to get everything and not have to green stuff everything ready to go. And I didn't buy it. My ultimate fear was I was intimidated to paint such a thing, because I'm like, if I paint it and I mess it up, which is kind of silly because they're big models, it's a Titan. But I was so intimidated with it, I never pulled that trigger. Sometime later, when we would go to visit local stores for tournaments, we went to this one store, and everyone's got like a Titan, and everyone has all this Forge World stuff. And if you've been around 40K for a little while, there's a number of third-party and companies now that would make chapter doors for your Rhinos and Land Raiders. But before that, previously, there were kind of upgrade kits. Some of the early Land Raider variants, you'd have to get the upgrade kits from Forge World. And having that bling was a big deal. It was a big status symbol at the time. And we go to this other club to play in a tournament, and I felt pretty pumped, because it's like, look, I've got a Forge World Chaos Dreadnought, Nurgle Dreadnought in my army. So I was pretty proud of that status-wise. But everyone at the club has got Titans, they've got the specialty kits, they've got the doors, they've got the Mechanicus stuff. And I was like, wow, I was really, really impressed. And in talking to one of the club members, more or less, they're like, yeah, we have a whole casting thing going on. So basically someone buys one of the pieces and we recast it, and everyone in the club kind of gets it. That was an interesting eye-opener at the time, being able to recast. And some of the recasts were so good, you really couldn't tell. Might have to green stuff a little bit, might have to work on fitting it, but once it's prepped and it's painted and it's attached to a model, you couldn't tell. And that kind of led into a number of years later, we're almost at the present time, we would start to see the idea of China Forge. These sites that are out there, they still are, but not as much, where you could order Games Workshop fine cast, resin cast, knockoff cast models, and no joke, $2,000 army, $3,000 40K army, you could pick up for like $400. And it looked 99% close. So you saw this idea of recast. And if you've been in the hobby for a while, you would see these, or you're aware of it. I'm not passing any type of judgment. I need to flash up like a million disclaimers. We're just kind of exploring the state of what's going on. So now that leads to the present time. Now, I think we can all agree the duality of Games Workshop, and it's the importance of their business model. They make fantastic models. They make fantastic kits, not just for 40K, but if you have a chance to check out Blackstone Fortress, I love Blackstone Fortress. These are mass-produced, snap-fit, no prep, no glue required models. You snip them off the sprue with a regular scissor and you're ready to go. And that's heresy right there, right? But they fit together. They look fantastic, and they're flowing parts. They look amazing. Someone playing 40K from 10 years ago could never envision these models. Look, back in the day, just trying to get my monolith to actually go together. Or if you remember trying to build some of the old land speeder kits, it was just crazy. And those kits were amazing back then. So Games Workshop has taken this art form of model production to such an amazing level with such amazing turnaround time. Look at every release of 40K. You get more and more models, more and more factions, better and better starter sets. It's really, really amazing. But the challenge with this is trying to keep up with it. And the duality is, of course, they have a lot of releases because they want you to buy more and more miniatures and models. But that can become problematic if you're trying to remain competitive, or you want to spawn or span multiple armies, or just trying to stay current on a hobby budget, especially if you're involved in a couple of other hobbies, maybe D&D or board gaming, focusing that out. Not to mention the time to build and paint, which is a worthwhile aspect of the hobby in itself. This now brings in that framework, 3D printers. 3D printers. When, if, and, or will they begin to displace Games Workshop? Is this the new China Forge, so to speak? Now, if we look at the Battletech community, Battletech has been in a very, very interesting place through the years, and it has been fixed or should be fixed shortly. Here's what I mean by that, just for some context, leading us back, circling back around to GW. You look at Battletech in the 80s, miniatures were produced, Ironwind Metals, they produced miniatures. Some of them are actually really good looking. Some of them are kind of a little weird looking. Very much dated at the time. Battletech was frozen in time. The board game, the miniatures game, the war game was frozen in time. But during that, you have a whole group of players that grew up on the video games, the old school games, the new games, and how the mechs are represented from that perspective. So you have a whole industry around Battletech 3D printing mechs and vehicles from the game that you just print out yourself, or there's entire stores out there that you can be like, I want a Marauder, 2 Riflemen, a Warhammer. They zap it out, they send it to you. And the 3D printing looks amazing. It looks fantastic. Very little prep work. So this whole idea was Battletech is not kept up in the community with miniatures. The Battletech fans want it. They've gone off and a whole 3D community, printing community has spawned up. Now we enter into the game where Catalyst Miniatures has re-released and is in the process of re-releasing numerous up-to-date miniatures across the entire spectrum. Inner Sphere Clans, Ironwind Metals is pushing stuff out. But 3D printing is accepted and well established in the Battletech community. Could 40K be replicated? Now, there is a difference between printing out, even though they're dynamic. If you have a chance to look at some of the Battletech mechs, they are dynamic looking, but they're kind of mech blocky-esque 80 robots. So it's easier to print them. I can't see how a 3D printer would currently print some of the Games Workshop models, but that's in the here and now. That's now. Where are we going to be 3 years from now? Where are we going to be 5 years from now? Some of the D&D models that I see people zapping out, I'm like, the tech is close. It's close. So would it reach a point with 40K where you could zap out some models? You could zap out stuff to play. How would it do those flowing robes? How would it do some of those banners? Games Workshop models from the 90s or early millennium, possibly. But the newest models, now maybe Games Workshop is countering that by saying, look, we're making our models so dynamic, the pose is so amazing that we're going to stay ahead of that tech curve. But would 3D printing be a threat to Games Workshop? Now, I try to think, have I seen any 3D printed 40K armies? I've seen a few pieces here and there. I've seen some upgrade stuff, but and not counting like Blackstone Fortress terrain and things of that nature, but I haven't seen wholesale armies yet, especially given the fact that there's a whole secondary industry that has popped up of alternate heads, alternate bodies, alternate Imperial Guard. Looking at that perspective, there are other model options that you could pull in a very functioning and interesting 40K army for some of the factions without going to Games Workshop. But the big question is, Games Workshop is a miniatures company first that gives you the rules, which are an excuse to play with your miniatures, to push them around on the table. And we'll put the rules aside for a second. If that aspect gets removed, where you can play in the Grimdark and you can immerse yourself in the rules, and you can be somewhat free from their miniatures but still play in there, again, IP aside, piracy aside, not condoning that, respecting property and the rights and the time that went into. Someone designed these miniatures. Someone sat in front of a computer designing all this. That's human hours. I don't want to take away from that. But if I step back and I look at this idea of disruption, like Uber and things like that, what would it take to disrupt Games Workshop? And would 3D printing do that? Not now. I think we can agree not now. But if you had to put a time frame on it, 5 years, that's not that far away. 10 years, things accelerate very, very, very fast. But it's interesting to see the recasts and the China Forge kind of petered out a little bit. Hard to keep up with the recasts. But once we get into some files and we get into some true print and play and we get into some download, that's going to be a completely, completely different game.